So, good morning to our guest speaker in Paris, and good afternoon to those of us in Japan. I am Ada Tagar-Cohen, professor at the Faculty of Theology and the director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Study of the Monotheistic Religions at Dosha University. I wish to thank you all for joining the first CISMOR seminar of this academic year. Today, I'm honored to host Professor Éloi Ficquet from the prestigious School for Advanced Studies in Social Science, known as EHESS in Paris. Professor Ficquet received his PhD in 2002 in Social Studies at EHESS, and soon after became a member of its Center of African Studies. From 2004 to 2007, he served as vice president of the school in charge of international relations. And between 2009 and 2012, he was director of the French Center for Ethiopian Studies in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Since 2012, he is associate professor at EHESS and a member of the Center for Social Studies of Religions. The works of Professor Ficquet are at the crossroad of ethnographic fieldwork for data collection, philological analysis for the critical study of documents, and history studies that place in perspective social dynamics. His main research concerns practices and discourses of coexistence and confrontation between Christian and Muslim societies in Ethiopia from the 17th century to today. From the Ethiopian settings that are multilingual and multicultural, he seeks to understand the interactions between religious affiliations and political organizations in connection with the development of modernity. Other forms of his works focus on contemporary arts in Africa and the Black Atlantic societies, particularly through the performance of jazz music and its political implications. I refer you to his recent publications on the attached file transferred on this chat. So please, you may download from the chat and see his publications. The topic of Professor Ficquet's lecture today is titled Questioning the War, in capital letters, in Tigray, Ethiopia, since November 2020, news, doubts, facts, and counterfacts. I'm honored to give the video spotlight to Professor Ficquet. Please. Unmute yourself, please. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's okay? Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Professor Cohen, for this introduction and for this invitation to give this lecture today. So, good morning from Paris and good afternoon to you and to the audience in Japan. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to share with you some views and thoughts on the crisis and civil war that is taking place, that has been taking place in Ethiopia for some months, 6 months now. So thank you to Professor Cohen and for the CISMOR team for the organization of this online lecture. So the title of my talk today is very wide, questioning the war in Tigray, Ethiopia since November 2020, news, doubts, facts, and counterfacts. I will focus my talk on specific sites, and I'm not going to discuss here the precise timeline of the causes and facts of the conflicts, but we'll have also the opportunity to have this discussion at the end of the lecture. Let me start by recalling that the last time I was at Doshisha University in Kyoto was in December 2019 for the 10th anniversary of the Graduate School of Global Studies at Doshisha on the invitation of Professor Nakanishi and Professor Yoichimine. And this lecture has been recently published in the Rondo Journal of the Global Studies Graduate School. And so at that time, I discussed about issues of interreligious coexistence in Ethiopia, and there was a lot of hope at that time for the country, since its Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to achieve reconciliation and peace agreement with Eritrea. And in my lecture, there was some discussion also about the meaning of this Nobel Peace Prize, since the full picture was not considered for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was awarded this Peace Prize alone himself, while usually peace prizes for reconciliation involved the two states or two parties, and the president of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, was not considered in this peace prize because of the harsh dictatorship of his rule over Eritrea. So there can be some questions about the expectations behind the award of the Peace Prize. From this point of view, we can think the Nobel Prize was premature and represented an interference of international community in a political transition process. However, I am not going to discuss here about the precise timelines of the events, political events in Ethiopia and Eritrea in the last years that led to the outbreak of these conflicts. And this is a picture of the current conflict and its consequences as assessed by the UN. Like any war, every fact of this conflict has been subject to differing interpretations, conflicting claims, and antagonistic accusations. When a massacre takes place, each side accuses the other of genocide. There has been a communication blackout, and it's very difficult for analysts, journalists to get independent information on the facts of the conflict. It is a situation of dualism that opposes not only two political projects, the national project of the Ethiopian government and the regional project of the government of Tigray in North Ethiopia. But this situation of dualism opposes two realities in an international regime of alternative truth, supported by the opposition of opinion groups in the social media, where all opinions can construct their own version of the reality and of the truth. As a social scientist and specialist of Ethiopia, since the outbreak of the conflict, I have often been interviewed by the national and international media to help understand what's at stake in this conflict and the evolution of its events, to provide my version, my understanding of the facts. And it's been quite difficult and sensitive to answer journalists in a factual way, because access to the facts is very limited. In my analysis, I have mainly reported on this state of confusion in Ethiopia today. And most of the people are confused. They don't know what to believe, on which information to rely. In interviews, journalists ask to be pedagogical, to provide detailed explanation on the context, but it is impossible in a 5-minute interview. And today I have the chance to speak with you and exchange questions and answer. And I hope we can get together a better understanding of what's going on in this part of the world. As we are at the CISMOR, the Center for Interdisciplinary Study of Monotheistic Religions at Doshisha University, let me use this opportunity to provide another perspective, more historical, on this conflict. And I will focus my talk on a religious site, a sacred place that is at the core of this conflict, which is the holy city of Axum, on the map here in the center of Tigray, not far from the border of Eritrea. And this is a picture of Axum that I took in October 2017, some years ago, much before the outbreak of the conflict. It was a time of peace and hope, a situation of political transition. And so you can see the wonderful scenery of this this city, and I will try to provide an overview of the political history, heritage, and symbolism of Ethiopia through this sacred place, so that you can get an understanding of some of the issues that are at stake in this conflict today. And we will see that Axum has been targeted, and the population of Axum was a victim of violence and exactions that took place during this conflict. And we will try to understand the implication of the massacre that happened in November 2020. From this overview of Axum city, we can see two very important heritage and historical sites. On the right side, you can see what's called the stele parks, or the obelisks of Axum. These are very tall stone monoliths or obelisks from the antiquity, and the taller are 25 meters high. This is very impressive. We will come back to it. And to the south of the obelisk site, on the left side, there is the religious complex of the church or cathedral of Mariam Tzayon, or the church of Zion in Axum. And also I will come back to this concept of Zion in local language, that refers to Jerusalem and to the transfer of sacrality from Jerusalem to Axum in the Ethiopian historical and religious perspective. So first, let us have a look on the steles or obelisk. Technically, these are not obelisks, for obelisks have their basis is a square, whereas this is rectangular, so it is technically a stele, but in the literature, usually these are called the obelisks of Axum. This is a very important piece of heritage of this city. So these monuments were erected in the antiquity during the time of the kingdom of Axum, from the period of 300 before Christ, and this kingdom lasted until 700 of the Common Era. These obelisks have also a history that is connected to conflicts on the international scale. For in 1937, one of these obelisks was taken by the Italian occupation army. So the Italians were the colonial power in Eritrea, north of Ethiopia. In 1936, Benito Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, and the symbol of the victory of the Italian colonial empire on the Ethiopian kingdom was the looting of an obelisk of Axum that was transferred to Rome, as we can see, in front of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. And the obelisk was of Axum was established there as a continuation of the Roman Empire in the antiquity that imported from Egypt obelisks that are still found in different places of Rome today. So for Mussolini, it was a way to build his own picture as a new emperor and a new symbol of power and hegemony of Italy. And the Italians in Ethiopia were defeated in 1921. There was a peace treaty in 1947 signed in Paris, and it included the return to Ethiopia of the looted heritage, and particularly the obelisks of Axum. But the Italian government long resisted was reluctant on this return, and there was long negotiations for that, also because technically it was very difficult to dismantle the obelisk and to transport it. So this took time, and finally it was in year 2005 that the Roman obelisk of Axum was returned to Ethiopia and re-erected in Axum, in the park of Stairs in front of Mariam Tzoyon Church. In fact, when the Italians took it in 1937, the obelisk was not standing. It was broken on the ground. And this is also the reason they took it, because it was in pieces that were easier to transport. So it is interesting to see that through these historical events, this heritage was in a way reinvented through different interventions. And also this very tall obelisk was standing historically. It is 23 meters high, but it's been fragilized by the works of re-establishing the other obelisk, and there is a system to keep it standing now. this is a picture of the stairs of obelisks of Axum as of 2017. So we can see the obelisk that was returned from Italy, and historical obelisk standing and supported by a technical device. A very tall broken obelisk that archaeologists think was fallen at the time of its erection, and also smaller stairs that are settled there. So the Axum stairs or obelisks are the standing testimonies to Ethiopia's long-standing participation in the world history, as we can see on this map showing the extension of the kingdom of Axum in the antiquity. So Axum in the Ethiopian inland on the highlands was connected to the port of Adulis on the Red Sea, and through the Red Sea was connected to trade routes with the Mediterranean, with the Arabian Peninsula, and with India through the Gulf of Aden. And at the time of its maximum expansion, the kingdom of Axum also dominated the region that is now known as Yemen. And in the 6th century of the Common Era, the king of Axum established a governor in the city of Sana'a. There was a competition between the Christian kingdom of Axum and the Jewish kingdom of Himyar. And after the victory of the king of Axum, Caleb, there was a temporary Christianization of Yemen. A cathedral was built in Sana'a, and it was just before the prophecies of Prophet Muhammad in Mecca and the beginning of Islam. And then Yemen was Islamized, and the kingdom of Axum became isolated by Islamic powers, and so there was a decline of Axum in the 8th century, opening to the Middle Ages and to the development of a new power system in Ethiopia. Despite the fact that the kingdom of Axum disappeared and has ended, the culture, the political culture, the references that were built at that time are still very important as historical references in Ethiopian political evolution. And the monuments of the obelisks are the symbols of the continuity of these power structures. And as I say here, they are like nails hammered into the texture of time to represent the sense of continuity of what was built in Axum as an alliance between a power system and religion, because the kingdom of Axum was converted to Christianity in the 4th century, so at the same time as the Roman Empire, and the kingdom of Axum wanted to play a role in world politics as a Christian power among other Christian powers at the time of the Byzantine Empire. And this is reflected by a legend or a national myth, which is the legend of the visit of Queen Sheba to Jerusalem and her meeting with King Solomon. And this legend is really a founding stone of the Ethiopian political culture. For according to this legend, after the Queen of Sheba met King Solomon and was seduced by him, so we see them in bed together, Queen of Sheba gave birth to a son who is said to be the firstborn son of King Solomon, and his name was Menelik, and according to the Ethiopian national myth, he was the founder of the kingdom of Axum. So Menelik was born in Ethiopia after the return of the Queen of Sheba from Jerusalem. But he asked, we see here asking questions about his father to his mother, and he went to Jerusalem to meet King Solomon. And King Solomon recognized him as his son and heir, and as inheritance, he transmitted him with the keys of power through the tablets of the law and the Ark of Covenant. So the core of the sacred power of the kingdom of Israel. And according to the Ethiopian legend, this was transferred to Ethiopia and kept in the city of Axum. And we see here the building of the obelisks of Axum as the founding stone of the kingdom and the founding stone of the transfer of a political project, ideology from the Mediterranean basin to Ethiopia. Here we can see what is called the Tabat in Ethiopian faith. The Tabat is a stone or wood carved object, which is also described as a portable altar, for in the Christian ritual, the Eucharist is processed on the Tabat. And at time of important annual ceremonies, the priests who are the only authorized to touch and see the tabots, they carry on their heads the tabots covered by precious fabrics. and these are considered the most sacred objects in the Ethiopian Christian faith, and they confer sacrality to the church. And tabots are which are found in each church, and we can see the name of the saints are inscribed on the Tabat, and they give the name to the church. Here is Michael, Gabriel, Mariam, so that the names of these holy figures is inscribed on the Tabat and give the name to the church. But the Tabat is considered as a replica of the tablets of law that are believed to be kept in Axum since the time of Menelik I, the son of Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. And we can see here the former church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, this one was built in the 17th century. Previous churches that were supposed to be the place where the Ark of Covenant was kept are not standing today. And this is the current chapel where the tablets of the law are kept in Axum today within the compound of the modern cathedral of Mariam Tzion, or Our Lady Mary of Zion, that was built in the 1950s by Emperor Haile Selassie. Here we see the interior of this modern church. So, since the 1950s, Axum was part of a process of reinvention in contemporary Ethiopian politics. Here we can see the visit of Emperor Haile Selassie and Queen Elizabeth II in 1965 with Prince Philip here and Prince Asfawasen of Ethiopia. So we see that Axum was reactivated as a central place of sacrality connecting the contemporary empire with the very long history of Ethiopian sovereignty. Here we see a picture in 2005 of the president of Ethiopia with the prime minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi, and the pope of the Ethiopian church, Abuna Paulos, at the time of the return of the obelisk from Italy. Here also we can see an interesting picture showing kings from traditional kings from Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Uganda, making a visit to Axum with popes of Orthodox Church in Europe. So we see a kind of mix of religious values, and one of these kings from Ivory Coast was baptized to the Ethiopian Orthodox faith and coronated as King David in Axum. So a kind of enactment of the founding myth of Axum within an African perspective. Also here we see that recently the Patriarch of the Ethiopian Church, Abuna Matthias, decorated the Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, with the award of the Golden Gospel. And we can see the Prime Minister and his wife dressed as former kings of Ethiopia. By his religious affiliation, Dr. Abiy Ahmed is not an Orthodox Christian, he is a Protestant Christian, but we see here that he is using the codes of the Ethiopian Christianity and the strong connections and alliance between Ethiopian power and the church since the antiquity. And these symbols are reenacted through this event. So a reconnection with the past, and this is one of the aspects of the transitional power of Abiy Ahmed since 2018 was to introduce modernization, reforms, economic reforms in Ethiopia, but also having a discourse geared towards the conservative Christians to propose a kind of reunification of Ethiopia on the basis of its historical culture and values, whereas the previous rulers of the federal regime were considered to make a split of Ethiopia. We will return to it. Here is another picture from 2018, which is very interesting because it represents Abuna Matthias, the Patriarch of the Ethiopian Church, with the Dr. Debretsion Gebre Michael, the head of the regional state of Tigray. And we see here him being dressed as a king next to the Patriarch. So this is also a very strong political representation. And we can see here kind of conflict of legitimacy between two political figures because the current conflict in Tigray opposes the regional army led by Debretsion Gebre Michael and the national army of Ethiopia led by Dr. Abiy Ahmed. And we see here that these two figures are claiming to be legitimate power figures by using these references to Ethiopian political symbols. And we can see also that these pictures was taken during the festival of Hadar Tzoyon in Axum on November 30, 2018. This festival This is a picture of this festival. Takes place every year to celebrate the church of the Ark of Covenant in Axum, or the Zion Church. So this is the festival dedicated to the Ark of Covenant, and it's being kept in Axum. And every year, this festival gathers thousands of pilgrims from all over the country. It is one of the most important religious festivals in Ethiopia. And we can wonder what happened on Hedat Zion's Day in November 2020. This is a quick timeline of the Tigray crisis since November 2020. So from the beginning of the law enforcement operation that officially started in November 4, 2020, when the eyes of the world were turned on the American election. There was what the Ethiopian government said to be a surprise attack by the Tigray regional forces on a military base in the territory of Tigray, the Northern Command. After that, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, here in military bomber dress, announced on television the beginning of the law enforcement operation in Tigray with a counter-strike. The parliament of Tigray was declared illegal by the parliament, the national parliament of Ethiopia, because in the month of September, the government of Tigray held its own elections, while the national elections that were to be taking place in May were postponed due to the COVID crisis. So this was at the core of the political conflict between the national government of Ethiopia and the regional government of Tigray, that did not claim for being independent, but wanted to claim that it was able to manage an election and that it was in a way more legitimate for governing than the government in Addis Ababa. So this is why here these pictures are very meaningful between the leader of Tigray, the Zion, and the prime minister of Ethiopia. So this is not a conflict for the independence of Tigray, but this is a conflict opposing two political visions and two claims of political legitimacy. Soon in the process of the conflict, a massacre happened on the west of the Tigray region near the borders of Sudan in Maikadra, and about 800 civilian people were killed, and both sides accused the other to be the perpetrators of this mass murder. Very early, there was a report, a bit hasty report by Amnesty International that put the responsibility of the massacre on warriors on the side of the Tigray regional forces. And this report was used by the federal government as a justification of having a very heavy military means for reestablishing the rule of law in Tigray. And we see here on the map the different fronts. So from the west, so the first clashes took place in the city of Dansha, southwest Tigray, where the military base was attacked at the beginning of November, and the regional forces of the Amhara state were involved into the control of the western region. So we see that there is an alliance between national Ethiopian forces with regional military forces against regional army of Tigray. And in addition to this, on the northern front, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces were allied with the Eritrean Defense Forces to control the eastern side of the region. So this is the continuation of the timeline. Many refugees from Tigray were on the move to escape the war, and they took refuge in Sudan, and there are also many internal displaced people, and the situation, the humanitarian situation, has become very serious, also because the territory was fragilized. It was the time of the season of crops, and so most of the crops could not be harvested. Also in September, there were locust invasion in the region. So also the situation of agriculture was very fragile. So this is adding to the very serious humanitarian situation in the region. And on November 30 of 2020, so the day of the Festival of Zion in Axum, on this very day, the Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, had a talk at the parliament and declared the end of the operation, because the capital city of Tigray, Mekelle, was taken by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. And after this, the Prime Minister declared the victory and the end of the operation, the beginning of reconstruction, claiming that not a single civilian was killed during the operation. But we can see that contradictory information were then spread, contradicting this claim that no civilian victim were killed. And particularly in Axum, there were news that emerged very slowly and spread about a massacre that took place in Axum in the month of November, at the time of this holy pilgrimage. And we can see the process of the making of this news to understand the very particular situation of this conflict and the difficulty of its analysis. The first piece of information on the events in Axum were provided by an office based in Brussels, the Europe External Program with Africa. It's an independent organization that since the beginning of the conflict published a newsletter, a daily newsletter on different sources of information on the conflict. And on the 10th of January 2021, so more than 1 month after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared victory, there were news still spreading on humanitarian situation that was looking more complicating that was claimed by the Ethiopian government. So we see here news about Eritrean refugee camps that were destroyed by the Eritrean army. And we see here the news that a massacre took place on the Orthodox Mariam Zion Church half December. So the date is not accurate. We see the information. We can understand now that the information was not that accurate, but it was the first information that was spread and that was raising some concern about the situation in Axum. But overall, it was difficult to get information. There is a blackout of communication, no access to internet. There is a ban of journalists who are not authorized to access Tigray. So it was not possible to get a confirmation of this information. And this massacre was for long kept silent, hidden, and the authorities made as if nothing had happened. But the pieces of news continued to spread and to bring a more detailed picture of what could have happened. On 17th January 2021, the journalist Theodoros Tigray made an interview on YouTube with an Ethiopian lady who was in Axum in November and escaped the city and returned to America, where she came from. And she could testify the fact that a massacre took place and was perpetrated by the Eritrean army at the time of the festival in Axum. Then, so some weeks later, in 11th February, the first media to report about the massacre was Libération, the French journal, newspaper in France. Maria Malagardis collected information from different witnesses. And the journalists at that time were very cautious not to publish fake news, because on the social media, so many news were spread that it is quite impossible to determine facts. And so it is why it took a long time for journalists to display this information. The day after, on a blog supporting the regional government of Tigray, an eyewitness, Getu Mak, who is lecturer at Adigrat University, published his own account of what happened in Axum, where he was, and he described the shelling of the city and the mass killing that took place. Then, a week after, journalist Karana of the Associated Press also published testimonies from victims of the massacre in Axum. At the same time, the government, the official communication of the Ethiopian government was silence, avoidance strategy, denial, minimization, compliance with international standards. We can see here Abiy Ahmed making declaration of the progress of avocado and papaya agriculture, or the development of an industrial site in Ethiopia. We can see here the official communication of the Minister of Women, Children and Youth, showing some concern about reports on sexual violence in the conflict of Tigray. And we can see here a declaration, an official statement of the Ethiopian government. So after the end of the operation was declared, there were still news spreading about the humanitarian situation and mounting international pressure for investigation of about war crimes. And we can see here the response of the government. On February 26, Amnesty International published a report about the massacre of hundreds of civilians that was perpetrated by Eritrean troops. This is a very detailed report based on oral testimonies, but also on satellite picture to show that in the compound of churches, burials may have taken place. And this amnesty report led to a turn into the flow of information, international media, the BBC News, CNN, and so on, so reported on this massacre. And the understanding of the conflict was changed because so far it was considered that the conflict was going to an end, that the Ethiopian National Army had won the victory since they took the capital city of Tigray, Mekelle, established a provisional government there. But then, with this report on the Axum massacre, the narrative on the war has changed. And the Ethiopian government was pushed to allow the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, which is an independent commission, but depending on the Ethiopian government, to have their own investigation on the human rights violations in Axum. And the report was published in March 23 recently, acknowledging that hundreds of civilians were killed. And the report of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is in the same line of what is described by Amnesty International. And on the same day, the Ethiopian Prime Minister admitted the Eritrean soldiers were involved in the conflict in Tigray. For long, the involvement of Eritrean troops was denied. It was considered as false propaganda, fake news, and we see that under the international pressure, here a joint press release by US State Minister and EU High Representative, so Anthony Blinken and Joseph Borrell, they put the pressure on the Ethiopian government to stop human rights violation, to provide humanitarian access to humanitarian organization, and for the withdrawal of Eritrean troops. For long, the Ethiopian and Eritrean government said they were not acting together in the conflict, but we see that with the spreading of this news and with international pressure, the official picture of the conflict has changed. Since yet the Eritrean government did not recognize its involvement until very recently. It is only on April 16, so last week, that a letter of the Eritrea's ambassador to the UN recognized Eritrean involvement in the war, but not acknowledging allegations of rapes and other crimes, considering outrageous accusations. So we are still in this situation, which is very difficult to understand. The conflict has not come to an end. Violence are still committed by Eritrean troops and also militias from different parts of Ethiopia. The conflict also has spread to the boundaries of Sudan, and Sudan and Egypt are also involved in the conflict because there are difficult negotiations on the dam on the border of Ethiopia. So we can wonder who holds the keys. Here is the picture of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and President Isaias in Asmara. No, not in Addis Ababa, when President Isaias received the key of the Eritrean embassy in Addis Ababa. And between Abiy Ahmed, Isaias Afwerki, we can really wonder who holds the key and how this conflict will come to an end. And I thank you for your attention.